Alright, now that we got our base idea down, it's time to start looking at how we can do some idea exploration inside of ZBrush. Before I get going, I'm going to actually build a little bit better topology to work with. So in the time-lapse video for actually creating this creature, he was made using primarily Dynamesh. So if we go to Tools and open this up and then go to Geometry, you can see Dynamesh. This is what was used to actually generate the topology for this. So it gave me enough to sculpt on and work with, but you can see if we look in really close, the topology is really heavy. I'm not going to have any subdivision levels to work with, things like that. So I'd like to build a little bit better topology for this, so when I start exploring some ideas, I can actually work with different subdivision levels and some cleaner topology. So to get this going, what I'm going to do is take this subtool. You can see it's got different poly frames for the arms because the arms were separate than the body. And if I zoom in really close, I might be able to see the eyes and see if those are a little bit different color for poly groups as well. And they are. And if you have something that's kind of similarly set up, then like what I have here, if you don't have the poly groups made, if you have these different objects like this, you could always go to the poly groups and you could say auto groups, and it would take a look at any kind of geometry that's on its own island and not merged with anything else, and it would turn that into a poly group. So these are already made for me. I can actually take this subtool and I can split it, and I can say group split. And because I've got these poly groups, it'll actually split these into different subtools. So you can see if I put it on solo, now you can see I'm just working with just the body, and there shouldn't be any eyes in there for that. So you can see that. So I might as well rename these. I can just go ahead and hit rename. So I'll call this body, and I'll call this DM for Dynamesh, like that. And these are my eyes, so I'll rename those. I'll call those eyes, and I'll just call that DM as well for Dynamesh. And then these are my arms, and do this same thing, Dynamesh, like this. So let's look at the arms real quick. Okay, so I want to build a better version of the topology of this. I want ZBrush to handle this for me and just build some decent topology to work with. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this thing. So I'm just going to go under the subtool section, say duplicate. And so then now I've got this arms DM1, and I could rename this thing to arms, and we'll call this, we're going to use ZRemesher. So I'll just hit ZR like that. Again, I have this thing set on solo, so that's the only reason why I'm just viewing just this one thing. Now I can come down here to geometry, and then instead of Dynamesh, we're going to look at ZRemesher, and we could keep it at a target poly count. We can see the default is 5 for 5,000, so I'll just put this at 6 because I'm working with the left side and the right side. I've got symmetry turned on, so if you just tap X and make sure you got symmetry turned on, when it rebuilds this topology for you, because you have symmetry turned on, it'll do the same for the left and the right. So let's go ahead and click ZRemesher and not do anything and see what the results are that it's going to give me. And it'll go through this calculation process, and when it's done, we'll take a look at this geo. So here's the geometry that it created for me. If I can turn on polyframe, we'll get a better idea of what that looks like. So because this is just being used for just some concept sculpting, I'm not too concerned about, you know, the geometry that it's making. Now it does make some pretty deep crevices and things like that because it looks at the detail that you had in your model and it generates it off of that. So if you wanted something that was a bit more clean topology and not so specific to the model, you could run this back. So I'll take this back just like this, and you can smooth out certain areas. So if I didn't want these areas to be like this, we could smooth this out. And I did notice whenever I'm working with the Dynamesh and I'm working with really high-res geo, this smooth becomes not so strong anymore. So if you want a stronger smooth, let me show you this real quick. We'll just hit the comma key to bring up the light box, and then we'll go to brush, and then there's smooth within here, and we'll do smooth stronger. So let's do this. It'll tell you that the next time that you go to use this tool, this one will be the one that's going to be used. So let's go ahead and hit OK for that. Now if I hold down Shift, you can see I can smooth this thing out quite a bit. So it's going to smooth out some of these details like this. I'll leave the major forms in there like this, because when it does this Z remesher, it does look at this kind of detail on your model and it tries to preserve it. So I'll smooth that out just a little bit, and through there and here. And I don't necessarily want this really descript vein that kind of runs down there either. So it looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and run that. So let's just run Z remesher. And you can see here's the topology that it generated. I'll go ahead and put it on polyframe right here so you can see. So you can see it's a bit cleaner now, and it's not as descript for that shape. So that's pretty cool. Now the next step is to get all the detail that I sculpted before and have it put onto this model. So that's pretty simple to do. First we're going to add some subdivision levels to it. So if we hit Control D or use this divide button under geometry, we can get subdivision levels. So I'll hit D. We'll do like 4 subdivision levels just for now and kind of see what this looks like. So I'll turn this thing off, and I want to project. So I'm going to go to Subtool, and I'm going to turn everything else off. So I'll hold down Shift and click on my little eye icon, and it turns everything else off. You could do it one at a time, but it's a little bit quicker if you just hold on Shift and click on that. So I want to project from this model here, which is the arms Dynamesh. So I need that visible, so I'll turn on the visibility of it, and even though I'm looking at it with solo, it's still on, but I'm going to just leave it on this arms Z remesher and have it on solo, so I'm only looking at just this model. The visibility is this is on. I'm going to go to project, and I'm going to go ahead and say project all, like this. And you could tell it to project the poly paint data if you want. You can just say yes or no, depending on if you want to transfer color or not. So let's go ahead and run that, and we'll see what the results are that it's going to give us. So that looks pretty good. So if you've got some areas that are missing, you might have to smooth out the model and then reproject. There's a distance associated with this thing, so if it's not projecting out far enough, you're going to have to play around with this distance. So this looks pretty good to me, and if I turn on the polyframe, I can see this is kind of the detail level that we're at, and I'll zoom in. And I think I need maybe one more subdivision level. So I'll just hit Control D to add a subdivision level, and it smooths it out a little bit. And then I'll do one more projection. And the more geometry that you have, it usually takes quite a bit longer to do that projection. So just be aware when you're trying to pick up all those little fine wrinkles and details and stuff like that. It might take a little bit longer to project that. Okay, and here's the final projection, and we pretty much have a 1-to-1 match now for what we had before. The difference is, if I turn on the polyframe, if we hold down, hit Shift D to drop down and keep hitting that, now we've got some subdivision levels to work with. So I can hit D to go up, and then Shift D to go down in subdivision levels. So that's pretty advantageous, right? So I use the power of ZBrush and the tools that it has to just use that virtual clay to build the sculpt, and then I use their tools to build some topology for me to get these subdivision levels, and then now I've got some decent topology to start working with, and then I have my sculpt back, and now it's going to be easier for me to kind of manipulate these shapes and do some things with it, right? But you want to make sure you're at a certain stage before you kind of get to this level here. So now that I've done with that process, I really don't need the Dynamesh arms anymore, so I can go ahead and select them and hit delete under Subtool, and so those are gone. And I'll go through this same process for the top piece here, but I do want to show you real quick. I'm going to duplicate this, and I just want to show you that it is possible, if you want to be very specific about things, that you can actually use some Z remesher guides, some lines to kind of guide the topology on where it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this after I duplicated it, and I'll call this put a ZM or ZR, sorry, at the end of it for Z remesher, like that. I'll turn the polyframe off, and I've got solo set on for this. So again, I'm going to make sure my model's symmetrical, so I'm just going to tap X and make sure that I've got symmetry turned on. And I'll make my brush size a little bit smaller, so just tapped S and drag that slider down to about here. And then if I go to B for brushes, and then there's these ZRemesher guides, I'll go ahead and click on that. And I'll skip this until next reset, like that. And what I'm kind of concerned about is these eyes. So I want to make sure that I'm drawing something that's kind of circular around the eyes, right around in there. And then maybe I draw a line for an eyelid here, like this. And maybe something like this here. We'll try this out and see how it goes. Then I could do something like this for the nose. And then I just need to draw certain lines on here that maybe it's going to follow this topology a little bit better, at least for the guides that I'm laying out. And I'll kind of run this here like this. Go here. And I'll follow some of these forms. So I don't think you have to be super descriptive about this, because I have seen it. It takes into account these lines, but it's not going to be an exact kind of thing. So I do know if you hold down Shift while you drag out, it can try to trace the object. And sometimes this works well, sometimes it's has trouble. Like I was hoping I could do it for the neck, but let me try this. This is maybe a shape that I should be doing anyways. So this usually works pretty good for things like arms and things like that. Sometimes it does work for things like the torso. So if I just hold down Shift and drag through, we wanted to build it on both sides. I'm not sure if it works so well with symmetry. So if I tap P to turn off perspective and I draw this thing out, then hold down Shift and drag through, we can get something like that. It works sometimes for me, sometimes not so great. So you could give it a shot and see if it works for you. But if I get into a situation like that, I might have to just draw a piece, and then if I get really close to that end, I can continue on for that line. I'll just keep coming around there so you can see how you've kind of pushed that piece off there. If you want to get rid of some of these lines, you hold down Alt and drag a marquee over it, and you can see it erases that piece like that. And we might have to get in kind of really close to that to get rid of that one. Because what I wanted to do is make sure I'm kind of following that shape a little bit better. Something like that. Then maybe we've got some geo that runs here like this. I'll outline this here. Come across. It looks like it had a little problem there at the very end, so I'll just erase that again. Try it one more time. So let's drag up to there, move my camera, then draw off of here, and then maybe follow some of this muscle structure a little bit better through here, like that. And then I'll do the basin of the neck. Draw something like this. And let's just do, I'll do one more down in this area, kind of like this, and we'll see what we get now by running this thing. So again, we can go to our geometry section, we'll go to the ZRemesher, and then we get to tell it a target poly count. So I'll pump this one up to about 10,000, and you can see it's adaptive. It's set to adaptive, so it's going to take a look at the guides for this, and then this is the adaptive strength and the curve strength. And so these sliders, you can hold down Control and get an idea of what some of these things actually do. So you'll have to kind of try some of these out and try some of the different options. But I'm not too concerned about things. It usually gives me pretty decent topology, at least for this concepting kind of stuff. Gives me decent topology at these stages, so I'll just go ahead and use some of the default options for this. Okay, and here's the topology that it spit out. I'll turn on the polyframe so we can take a look at some of this stuff, and you can see how it did follow some of those different shapes that we drew out, at least for the line work, and we've got some of the circular kind of things going on. Let's take a look at the eye area. And so this is, you know, I wish it was maybe a little bit tighter in through there, but like I said, I'm not super concerned about this topology. I just want something that I can get these subdivision levels back, and it looks pretty good. The other thing is I didn't smooth the model in any kind of place, so you can see it really tried to build the different topology in these different areas. Every now and then you might have to take an area and I'll just, you know, smooth this out just a little bit right there. And you might just want to take a look through the model and see if there's any areas that has any kind of this pinching going on, and you can kind of pre-smooth this before you add the subdivision levels, and that'll help out with the projection of things as well. So I'm just kind of looking around through there. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and do that same process for this thing, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to project. So the only thing I've got visible over here with this eye icon is this body Dynamesh. And so I'll add some subdivision levels. I'll do about 3 or 4 of them. So let's go to geometry, and I've got 3. So we can do that, and we'll start with that. And then I'll go ahead and use this project all in the subtool area. And we'll go ahead and say yes for the polypaint information. Let this go through. This one's running fairly quick. I'll turn off the polyframe and take a look at that. And so you can see this is a way that we can kind of judge how much you know, information do we have here, how many polys do we have. So you can see it's still pretty rough. So I did that first projection. I can hit Control D, add another one, and it smooths it out like we'd expect. And then we can hit project all again. But I think if you do this projection in some of these kind of stages like this, you end up with better results. It might take just a little bit longer, but I think if you just cranked up your subdivision levels and then ran this, you will probably run into some problems, and you got to kind of clean it up anyway. So I don't think you're really going to save yourself any time by doing that. So just go ahead and kind of work in these stages, and I think that'll produce the best results for you. So you can see here's the next projection up, and I'll still a little bit sparse in these areas, so I'll hit Control D and add another subdivision level, and then we'll go ahead and do a project all again and see the results after this is done. Okay, and here's what the projection looks like now. And again, if we go to geometry, I'm at 5 subdivision levels, and we can turn on polyframe and see what this looks like. It's going to do the autosave, so let me drop this down. So again, dropping down to subdivision levels, Shift D like this. And one thing about this polyframe is if we go to the low subdivision level and we turn on polyframe here and then we hit D to step up, it'll keep that polyframe at that resolution of the lowest cage and still let you see the high-res geo. So that comes in handy. Otherwise, if you turn this thing off and then turn it on, you can see it's going to show you the polyframe at that subdivision level. So let's drop it down, turn this off, turn it back on, hit D to go up through the subdivision levels, and then you can get an idea of what this final topology looks like with everything projected over. So everything's looking pretty good. Like this, I'll turn off polyframe, and so when we're done with this process, I don't really need this Dynamesh version anymore, so I'll go ahead and hit delete like this, hit OK. Let's just take a look at the eyes real quick. I'll tap F, and we've got this geo here for that. Turn that on. And I don't think anything's too crazy or special about the eyes, but I will add some subdivision levels to it. So I'll hit Control D like this and add another one. And you can see they're kind of lumpy, right? So I don't really, I don't know. I don't really want to keep that. I would like some nice clean shapes for that. So it's pretty easy for us to add some spheres to the scene. So again, I'm going to use Lightbox. So I'll just tap the comma key, and they do have some different tools within here. And if you just use this polysphere, you can double click on it like this, and it'll look like it's switching over to that model, and it is. So I'll hit the comma key to close the light box. I'll tap F for this, and here is the sphere that we have for this thing. I'm going to go ahead and delete the subdivision levels for this. So I'm going to go to geometry, and if we delete lower, you can see it's got these subdivision levels on it. I can delete that and just kind of freeze it. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it. Actually, I'm going to move it later. I'm going to need to get this sphere into the model that I was working with the body and everything else like that. So that's pretty easy to do. We can just go over to our model that we've got here. We hit append, and then when we've got this whole trough of different models that kind of exist in the program right now, since we pulled that polysphere in, we can just click it, and you can see it's going to add it to the bottom down here like this. So I can take this thing and I can move it. So I'm going to put on the move, the transpose tool. I'll just click and drag a line out, and then click and drag and move this thing over and through here, and then maybe I scale it down. So I'll just click and drag out a new line and take this piece here and just keep pushing it down a little bit to get this in here. I'm going to take it off solo. So I'm only working with just this visibility of this, and I'll turn on the visibility of the eyes that I've got over here. And so I need to get these things roughly the same size, so I was going to keep scaling this thing down using this tool like this, and I'll put it back on move and get it a little bit closer. I'll tap F, so I'm kind of framing everything and getting everything a little bit closer, right? So now I can click and drag this thing out and do scale, and now it starts to really scale pretty quickly. And I'll put it on move and try to get this thing roughly in the right spot here, and if I click and drag this middle one, I can put it right here like that, and then I'll do scale again and just kind of scale this thing down, trying to get it the right size. And so I'm looking at it from more of a front view, and I can move it off to the side, rotate, and I'll hold down shift and just kind of snap my view like this. And if I drag a line out on this, if I hold down shift, I can constrain it to where it makes a nice straight line, or these different increments like we see here. And now I'll just click and drag this middle one while holding down shift, and it'll constrain that motion. So we're getting pretty close here. I don't think I need to be like super specific about this. So now we've got an eye on one side, and we can easily duplicate that thing. So we'll go ahead and say duplicate, and we can take any one of these copies, and then we'll go to deformation, and we're going to mirror it across the x-axis like this. So now we've got two eyes, and they're separate, and I want to merge them down so they become one eye. So I can go to subtool, say merge, and say merge down. I'm going to merge down this layer like that, hit OK, and now I've got some new eyes. I can rename this, and I'll call this eyes. And I don't need the old ones anymore. I can just delete them, get rid of them like that. And here we are with our eyes. I'll select them again, and then now you can see they're nice and smooth and everything else like that, right? But what if I want some subdivision levels back on this thing? So the cool thing about ZBrush is it can actually rebuild subdivision levels if you've got clean topology. So this thing actually started off with subdivision levels, and if we go to geometry, we can say reconstruct subdivision levels and keep hitting that until it can't build anymore. Since these really did start off as cubes, you could keep going all the way back until you have cubes for them. So you could go back that far if you want, and then now you've got your subdivision levels back. And now if you want, for performance reasons, if you want to drop this thing down and now look at something so high, you have that ability to do that now. I want these things to be nice and smooth, so if I get in pretty close, yeah, that's about smooth enough for me. Okay, so I'll take this and turn on the visibility of the head, and we'll zoom out a little bit like this. So you can see our eyes are still working with the head and everything else. And now we've got this much cleaner topology. It's basically the same model that we had before, but if we take a look at everything with the topology, we now have clean topology, and we have our shape back. And I know it was a little bit of work, but it's going to pay off for us whenever we start doing some alterations to our model. So I've saved off some camera views up and through here, and I've saved them out, and I can load them every single time. So I'm just going to click on this custom one here, and I'm going to save this scene as a whole new scene. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm saving the project for this. And so I've got a naming convention, and I'll just put this at the end here. I'll change the 8 to a 9. And then so I've got a whole new version that I'm working with. And so now I'm ready to go and start doing some big shape exploration and start doing some changes to this model.